So I've learned 9 languages at the age of 27, and although it has taken me a lot of work, there are certain small habits that I've applied for a long time that have helped me reach fluency faster. So today I'm gonna tell you what those 10 habits are so that you can start applying the ones you find more useful. The first one is to do language learning in the morning. So doing your top priority first thing in the morning is certainly one of the most repeated pieces of advice that you'll hear all sorts of personal development gurus say. It's not surprising thus that polyglots such as Luca and Wurter abide by this rule. So there are many reasons as to why this is a good idea. Most importantly, that your mind is going to be fresher to absorb new material. And also that you know that no one is going to disrupt you at like 7 or 8 in the morning. If you try to do it later in the day, you're less likely to pull it off because an unexpected event might come across, or you might just be exhausted after a day at work and rather do something else instead. So what's exactly what I do in the morning? Well, I like to listen to a podcast in a foreign language on my way to work. Alternatively, if I'm doing home office, I will do it while eating breakfast. Whether you decide to do this in the morning or not, the key thing here is to pair language learning with an activity that you have to do every day. This way, when you start that activity or as soon as it finishes, you'll automatically open that podcast or that book that you're learning in your target language. For instance, you could pair language learning with a meal, as I do when I do home office. Then you also have people who pair doing sports with language learning, usually by getting the comprehensible input during their workouts. Or it could also be something you do after performing another task. For example, after taking a shower, you read for 15 minutes, or after making your bed, you listen to an ebook for 10 minutes. So the bottom line here is pick a moment of the day where you can consistently work on your target languages, and after a while, that action will become automatic. Another habit I have is to write down the new words I come across. This is something I not only apply while I'm listening to podcasts, but also if I'm having a conversation in a foreign language and there's a word I don't know, or if that same thing happens while I'm watching a movie in a foreign tongue. So I'm sort of always aware in case there's a word I can capture. If I do this, I try to write down the context and the place where I heard it as well. But simply writing down the words I don't know is just not enough. I need to do something with them in order to make them stick. So firstly, you need to translate them, right? Which is something I usually do on my way back home or before going to bed. Again, here it's also important to pair this with an activity so that you end up performing it automatically day after day. So I try to do this on the same day that I heard that word in the podcast. But translating the words per se is not enough to make them stick, because otherwise I'm unlikely to remember the context in which I first heard that word. You need a system that prompts you to review the words that you're trying to learn. In my case, I have both Anki flashcards and lists of vocabulary on my phone ready to be checked on the go. So what I've tried to do is to build a habit of reviewing the words in the dead moments I have in the day. So instead of mindlessly scrolling through my Instagram feed whenever I have a 10-minute bus ride or whenever I'm waiting for the subway, I might probably have a look at some words in French instead. That is, I've replaced the habit of checking my social media with the habit of opening Anki. If I happen to feel the urge to open my Facebook account, then I've trained myself to do something else instead. By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you feel that this video is adding value to you, then just give me a like, please. So something else I try to do is to review the vocabulary that I've learned in a class just after it has come to an end. I have conversation classes with teachers on ITALKI, so whenever I finish a lesson, there will be a bunch of words on the chat that were the ones that I was unable to say correctly or that I didn't know during the class. So what I used to do before is to postpone this activity for a few hours or days. But then I was not able to remember the context in which I had seen some of those words because of the speed at which we forget information. So although I'm quite tired after a lesson, I will force myself to stay 5 minutes more to create some flashcards, or at least to go over the vocab that I've learned during the last half an hour. This very small action is definitely helping me retain words better. Another very important habit is to review some of the materials I've gone through. So novelty is important in language learning in order to learn new words and expressions, but you also need repetition in order to make those words stick. So you always need to strike the right balance between the two. The way I do this is by devoting the weekends to re-listening to some of the most interesting podcast episodes that I've heard during the weekdays. This will expose me to the new words again and in context, which will help me better retain them. Another important habit that I have is that I'm constantly adding new content to my YouTube playlists. So whenever YouTube suggests me a video in, say, Portuguese on a moment when I'm not interested in listening to content in that language, what I will do is just to take 5 seconds of my time to save that video on the corresponding Portuguese playlist. If I repeat this action over and over again, I can be sure that whenever I open a playlist, I'll find a bunch of videos in that foreign language that I haven't listened to. This habit is extremely important because it prevents me from wasting time searching for new materials to listen to every day, which is especially dangerous if you're on YouTube, because you might be suggested a video unrelated to language learning, but if it's interesting enough, then you'll click on it and you'll end up watching that one instead of the one in your target language. But with this habit, I prevent the latter from happening because I'll go directly to the playlist of the language I want to work on. Another habit I have is that I force myself to speak in the other person's mother tongue whenever possible. So whenever I meet a new person and I find out that his or her native language is one of the languages I speak, then I'll try to switch to it. In most of the cases, the other person will gladly switch to his or her mother tongue. In some others, though, they might feel that my level is not good enough and thus will end up switching back to English. But even if the latter is the case, I don't lose anything by trying. At least it would have been a nice icebreaker, I guess. It's important to do this language switch as soon as possible. Otherwise, you might just get used to speaking to each other in English, and thus switching back to his or her mother tongue every now and then will feel weird. By making this a habit, by switching to the other person's native tongue whenever I meet new people, I am opening up opportunities to use some of my languages on a daily or on a weekly basis. And this will add up to many hours of listening and speaking over time. So finally, we have reached habit number 10, which is a corollary of the previous one. So not only do I make the effort to use the other person's native tongue when speaking, but also when writing. So whenever I have to write an email, a Slack or a Teams message to a person whose native language is something other than English, then I'll make the effort to write it on the other person's native tongue. I'm aware that this will take me way longer than writing the message in English, maybe 3x, 4x, or even more depending on the language. So given that this has a few downsides, there are exceptions to this rule. For instance, I probably wouldn't do it if I'm pressed for time, if I have to write a very long email, or if the topic I'm dealing with is of paramount importance. But apart from that, I'll try to apply this habit whenever possible. As with the previous habit, this action will not have an immediate effect on your level. By just writing an email or a few sentences in another tongue, you're certainly not gonna improve much. But if you do this repeatedly over years and years, then it will certainly have an impact on your level. So those are my 10 favorite habits. I hope you found some of them useful, and if so, please let me know in the comment section below. Thanks, and see you next time.